This morning, once again, we're going to be talking about this idea of instincts and how it is that our inborn, innate kind of hardwiring is something that Jesus Christ died to change. Jesus Christ died so that the Holy Spirit might enter us and might begin the process of transforming us and making us new and making us whole. A return back to what was supposed to be. You know, when sin entered the world, it changed everything. And one of the things that it changed, as we've been exploring in this series of lessons, it's changed our instincts. Those natural ways in which we go about interacting with our world. And they're not the way that they were supposed to be. They're not the way we were created. So we've been contrasting the instincts between the natural and fallen instincts and those new instincts that Christ gives us. One of the key passages that have been very important for us in this particular study comes to us from Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. And it says, "Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may discern what is the good, the pleasing, and the perfect will of God." One of the things we've been talking about is this transformative power of Jesus Christ in our life and the instincts that have been changed. In the fall, everything was corrupted. Everything was changed. Nature, our relationships to each other, our relationship to God, our physical bodies, our world, even our instincts. And so because of that, we've looked at some things that God is recreating within us on a deep soul level, on an instinctual level. God created us to be generous, but sin has made us greedy. God created us to be hospitable, open to all people, but sin has made us inclusive. Sin has made us exclusive. God created us to be curious and growing and hungry for more, but sin makes us self-assured and arrogant, stagnant, and calcified. God created us to help one another and to need help from one another, but sin has made us self-reliant and distrustful of others around us. And so we've seen on this series how many different ways it is that sin has encroached upon us on an instinctual level and has changed the wiring, has changed the way that we work and the way that we think about our world. So today we're going to be turning our attention to something that's a very big part of our life, and it probably gets, at least in my estimation, a lot less attention than it really is deserving, and that's sensation. We're going to be talking today about the instinct of emotions. It's not often that we think about our emotional life, except when we think about it in unhealthy ways. We think about that we are out of control, that we're not maintaining or managing our emotions, that we're not regulating our emotions. And so we always think of it in terms of unhealthy things that we are finding ourselves in. But the reality is that God gave us emotions. God gave us emotions, and we're going to be looking at some of the reasons why that is and how it is that we can God can restore within us those emotions back to their pre-corrupted state, and how Jesus goes about doing that. So, first of all, what are the emotions? It's important for us to have a good picture of what we're even talking about if we're going to talk about the ways that Jesus is going to come and restore those to their proper place in our life. You know, this week in preparing this lesson, I spent a lot of time wondering something, and I find myself thinking about odd things, and so I got to wondering. I wonder if humans are the only ones that have emotions as we think of them. Are humans the only animals that have emotions? And so as these thought exercises often do, it ended up taking me down a rabbit hole that ate up a good portion of a morning as I was finding myself going from article to article and study to study, researching this idea. And I found one that I thought was really interesting. It was by a guy named Paul Thagard. And Paul Thagard is a philosopher, and he is famous for his 3-volume work entitled Treatise on Mind and Society. I said that right. 3 volumes. Yes, there are 3. No, I did not read them. In fact, I did not read any of them. But he organized what I thought was a fascinating debate. And he brought in a philosopher who believed that the animal kingdom demonstrates emotions on the same level that we do. And he brought in a philosopher who does not believe that the animal kingdoms have the capacity for such complex things as emotional feeling. And it was really a fascinating back and forth, and I spent way too much time looking at it. And in fact, if you're interested in it, I'd be happy to shoot you a copy of the transcript. What I came away with was the thought that whichever side you started on, you probably felt that person won. It wasn't enough to make me change my view one way or the other. But the thing that it reiterated to me is how incredibly complex this thing that we call human emotions really is. It is a ridiculously complex concept. And it is so entangled in every single thing that we do and everything that we are. We spend so much of our lives trying to name and manage and organize and regulate and feed our emotions all the time. But we do so with very little understanding of what these emotions really even are. Emotions have been, no surprise, a topic of discussion and study for philosophers and theologians for a millennia, as long as people have been recording what they're studying. There are some interesting things from the world of philosophy. Let me just read you a couple. Hume, the famous philosopher, says this: "Our emotions contribute to our identity as much as our impressions and ideas do. They make our perceptions influence others, and they occur at very different times." This was in his treatise of human nature. Aristotle, a name that we all know: "Things that are found in the soul are of three types: the emotions, the faculties, and the states of character." And Spinoza, the famous Christian philosopher, said, "Assuredly, human emotions indicate the power and ingenuity of nature, if not of human nature, quite as fully as all other things which we admire, which we delight to contemplate. But I pass on that those qualities in the emotions that are to bring an advantage to man or to inflict injury upon him." Now, there's a whole lot of fancy talk there and a lot of big words, but let me just bring it down to you. And here's what it basically is saying in plain English. These three things. First, emotions are a very important part of what makes me, me. My emotions are as much a part of me as my eye color or my lack of hair or the gray in my beard or anything that you see and know about me. My emotions make up a huge part of my identity. Secondly, it says that emotions are one of the central ways that I experience, interact, and come to understand my world. My emotions play as much a role as my intellect and my eyesight and my tactile sensation as anything else of understanding and comprehending and experiencing my world. My emotions are a major part of that. And third, my emotions, well managed, are a great help to me. My emotions, poorly managed, are a great hardship for me to bear. They're really complex and they're really broad. Think about everything that we group under this idea of emotions, and it really runs an enormous gamut. It's just such breadth and depth. So much of your life, in fact, virtually every waking moment of your life is somehow engaged with an emotion. Fear, joy, peace, jealousy, happiness, uncertainty, acceptance, loneliness, courage, inferiority. We could go on and on and on. But they are as much a part of our world as the things that we touch and the things that we hear and the things that we see. And they're as much a part of us as any physical attribute that we might bring to bear. You know, I bet you are like me, that you could go back and you could take any of these emotions, peace and joy, happiness and uncertainty, inferiority and courage, and you could relate those to moments in your life where you felt those, situations where those were clearly demonstrated in your heart. And every moment, virtually every moment, is connected to that. Emotions, one put, is this: as natural as the rain in spring, as powerful as the raging hurricane, as beautiful as a sunrise, as bleak as the grave. You know, when you think about how complex they are and how engaging they are and how difficult to manage the human emotions are, it really makes you wonder, why did God make us this way? Why did God make us like this? And I think one of the answers comes to us in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27. We have this beautiful passage. God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. One of the things that we know about emotions is that we are made in the image of God, and one of the things that God imprinted upon us are emotions. In the Bible, we see on display a myriad of God's emotions, and they are many of the same emotions that we have on a very regular basis. We see God in times of frustration. We see God in times of joy. We see him sad and heartbroken, and we see him delighted, and we see him generous, and we see him patient, and we see all the different emotions that we have. And it helps us to understand that we did not gain emotions when we fell. Emotions are not a subsequent aspect of the fall. Emotions were there from the beginning, and emotions are not bad. Emotions, like most things, are good or bad depending on how we use them. And God has emotions, and God made us to be emotions. And when we sinned, sin corrupted our emotions the same way it corrupted our bodies and corrupted our earth and corrupted our relationships. These emotions that we talk about have been found to have three forms. There are three main ways that we identify emotions. Three main ways that they manifest themselves in our life. And let's look at what they are. First of all, we have the feeling. Emotions in the form of feeling. When we talk about this is something that washes over us. This is a response to a catalyst. This is something that's not planned, but it's a deep sensation that's brought on by a situation. A child's laughter brings within us a feeling of joy. The passing of a loved one washes over this feeling of sadness and loneliness. And so these are normal responses and their feelings. And it's interesting to me that the most common feeling, the most common emotion expressed as feeling is anger. Anger, it says something, doesn't it, to how far we've fallen. Research tells us that the average person feels angry at least one time a day, and 3 to 5 times a day feels strong feelings of annoyance. It's that common. It's that common a feeling. But secondly, emotions have the form of evaluation. The form of evaluation. And this is a little tougher to put into words, but there's a value that's being placed on a situation, and it's expressed as an emotion. Let me explain it this way. You're walking down a path and you see a snake slither in front of you. Well, that snake is going to bring about within you an emotion, in this case, probably an emotion of fear. And the reason for that is that your subconscious is evaluating that as a threat. There is a potential danger. And so the natural response to that potential danger is an emotion that we call fear. Fear is the most common evaluative emotion that we have. So far, we're angry and we're fearful. And the third doesn't make it any better, because the third form of emotional response is the form of motivation. And that is the impetus behind an action. Why do we do something that we do? Emotions are enormously valuable in generating forward momentum towards a goal. Emotions push us to act. What are some of the emotions that motivate us? What are some of the things that drive us and spur us into action? Well, the most common motivational emotion is guilt. We are driven to do things because we're overcome by a sensation of guilt. It's not necessarily because of choice or logic or careful consideration, but we do something because we have this feeling, this profound sense of guilt that's pushing us into things. You see, this is a clear picture of how emotions have gone so far from what it means to be made in the image of God. Emotions are something God shares with us in a beautiful gift. And yet in our fallen state, what we have most commonly are feelings of anger, evaluations of fear, and motivations of guilt. And I think it has to break God's heart that he looks down and sees how desperately twisted the emotions that he's given us have become. Well, throughout history, we've tried to fix this. You got to give man credit. We recognize when something's broken. We can see that this isn't working. And for as long as people have been recording history, they've been saying this whole emotion thing we're way off on, and we've got to get a handle on it. And so we've tried many, many times to fix our broken emotions. And largely it revolves around two general camps, two major ways that we try to regain control over this thing called emotion. And the first one is stoicism. Stoicism. Stoicism's a fancy word, but you know what it means because you've heard someone called stoic. He's a very stoic person. We often talk about someone who's stoic as they're cold, they're removed, they're calculating, they're logical. There's no emotion. They don't let feelings become a part of it. And this is something that goes back to this ancient idea of stoicism. And from the most ancient times, people have tried to repress emotions. Some emotions are great, but a lot of emotions are bad. And we want to get rid of those lousy emotions. And so one of the ways we do that is we try to push away all the emotion we can. If we can reduce the world back down to some logical, cold series of algorithms and thoughts, then we're not going to be bothered by and hurt by these things called emotions. Cicero, the famous philosopher, said this, "But as it is a most fitting rule for all of one's life, we shun passion. By which I mean emotions. Life ought to be free from emotions of any kind." A Stoic says, if I don't feel, it won't hurt. So I'll get rid of my feelings, and that'll protect me from the hurt. As I was researching this, I found it fascinating how many times people have supposed or kind of suggested that the Bible actually teaches Stoicism, that the Bible teaches these principles of Stoicism. They point to passages like Ecclesiastes chapter 7, where Solomon is advocating that we avoid extremes. Don't go down the road of extremes. Don't go to unusual measures. What you want is a stable, logical kind of existence. Those who advocate Stoicism will point to passages on Jesus' teaching where Jesus says, don't worry, don't be angry, don't act out of jealousy, don't act out of greed. And a Stoic will say, see, Jesus is teaching you to put away your feelings. Jesus is teaching you to push away your emotions and disengage yourself from, detach yourself from all of these things. Proverbs 29:11 is held up as a treasured verse for Stoics. In this, that we're taught that we're wise to not do anything out of emotion. That what you should do is you should act from cool logic and don't do things out of emotion. So maybe, humans have said, the answer is, and let's just get rid of our emotions. Let's push them aside. Well, the other side of that coin is equally well tread. And that is the path of hedonism. And that's the idea that what we can do is we can pour ourselves into pursuit of emotion. We don't want to try to get away from emotion. We know that some emotions are really wonderful and bring pleasure and are joyful and are great. And so what we want to do is we want to flood ourselves with so many of these good emotions that it kind of overshadows any of the bad ones that we don't want to feel anymore. I'll just pursue to the nth degree the pleasure emotions, and that'll bring me the happy life that I want. A hedonist says, if it feels good, I'm going to do it. If it doesn't feel good, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to go for that pursuit of what I find to be a fulfillment of my emotions, a fulfillment of my pleasures. And once again, you may be surprised to know that some have ascribed these principles to biblical teaching as well. Solomon famously spent many years of his life examining the good life. And he said, that he went after folly and he went after wine and possessions and fame and wealth. And in these, he was pursuing happiness. In fact, he sums it up nicely in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verse 10. He says this, "I did not restrain myself from getting whatever I wanted. I do not deny myself anything that would bring me pleasure. So all my accomplishments gave me joy, and this was my reward for all my effort." See, some would say, well, hedonism is the plan. That's the way we go. We chase all the joy we can get, and that's where we'll find a way to overcome and fix our broken emotions. Well, neither of those ultimately is the answer, because the problem comes in the first word in that sentence, and that is the word man's. Man's attempt to fix our broken emotions. You see, as long as we are trying to fix something in this world that is beyond our fixing, we're going to find ourselves continually frustrated and incapable of moving forward from it. Here's the bottom line and the truth. We can't fix our sin. We can't fix our world. We can't fix our bodies. We can't fix our minds. We can't fix our emotions. We can't fix the death problem. We can't fix these things on our own. And so all of our efforts are going to ultimately lead us down a really frustrating path of futility. Because the only thing that's going to be able to fix this is Jesus Christ's sacrifice and the Holy Spirit's ongoing work of salvation within us. That is where we're going to find the answers to the questions that we are so desperately searching for. I find it fascinating where Jesus' answer falls. Because Jesus' answer in his own ministry, in his own life, in his own teaching, falls somewhere between the hedonist and the stoic. Jesus was deeply emotional. Many times he wept bitterly. He burst into tears. He was so very moved. He was moved with compassion. We all know that famous verse at the tomb of Lazarus where it says simply and yet poignantly with great emotion, Jesus wept. He was deeply emotional. He didn't shy away from his emotions. He didn't ignore them or repress them. But Jesus was very restrained. And he often taught that it's very important for us to bring our emotions into strict control and not be driven by them. We can't live lives that are in pursuit of those expectations placed before us by our emotions. He taught us that. He said, if looking upon someone, your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out, better to go into heaven without it. Well, what was he saying? He was saying you cannot follow blindly, excuse the pun, the desires of your eyes. You can't chase after the lustful desires of your own emotional, your own emotional self, because there has to be a level of restraint. He demonstrated how to find the perfect balance between these, and it is in him that we can find exactly what he came to give us. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it to the fullest. That's his goal for us. His goal for us is that he would put all things right and reveal to us the proper way. So what is the proper way? Well, Jesus' plan, as he demonstrated it and as he teaches us, is to acknowledge the emotions that you have, but to choose the emotion that you're going to act on. Choose the emotion you're going to act on. Let's take a story that comes to us from Matthew chapter 14. Jesus' cousin and very close friend, John the Baptist, has just been executed by Herod. And Jesus is about to mourn. He's beginning to mourn this terrible, deep loss. We know that Jesus was in touch with his emotions and that he felt deeply the loss of those around him. But no sooner had this news been given to him and that he's beginning to mourn, and he's attempting to leave, and he's trying to find some place to process this, trying to find some way to get away from the crowds, but he's followed by thousands and thousands of people, a multitude of people. And most of humanity there, tired and sad and heartbroken, would have been angry that they couldn't be alone. But not Jesus. Jesus in Matthew 14:14 said this, when he came and saw the large crowd, he was compassionate to them, and he healed their sick. You see, Jesus had sadness and hurt and heartache and potential for anger. But Jesus looked and he saw with compassion these people who were so needful of him. And he chose to place his focus on the emotion of compassion and to act in that direction. He placed the needs of the sick and the hungry over his own frustration and sadness. He identified these two powerful emotions, but he chose the one that benefited the other. Now remember, emotions form roles: feeling, evaluation, and motivation. And in each of these, Jesus chose an emotion that spoke in a positive way to these. Jesus chose compassion, and compassion feels good. It brings a feeling of good and peace and satisfaction. Compassion identifies, it evaluates the good that one can do. It looks around and says, where is there possibility here? And compassion motivates, because compassion is an emotion that drives us to do something to be a blessing to someone else. You know, there's something here very profound, something here very significant. Jesus doesn't deny the sadness of losing John. Jesus doesn't deny the anger of being interrupted in his mourning. He doesn't deny those. He recognizes those are natural emotions and they're there, but he chooses to fixate on compassion. And we can, with his help and with his direction, learn to do that better, to choose the emotion that we're going to derive our motivation, our feeling, and our evaluation from. There's an old American, a Native American proverb that speaks of man having two wolves on his shoulders. One is evil and one is good. And the question always comes, well, how will you know which one will ultimately win? And the answer is, the one will win that you feed. The wolf that you feed will win. The emotion that you focus on will rule the moment. And I think Jesus shows us that. He chooses the emotion to act upon. I think this is a similar idea to what we have in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 32. Paul picks up on this idea, and listen to this, Ephesians 4:32. And this is from the Kingdom translation of the New Testament. It says, instead, be kind to one another, cherish tender feelings for others, forgive one another, just as God forgave you. Instead, now notice, instead, don't do what comes natural. Instead, you choose to do something else. What does he say to do? You be kind to one another. Well, Paul, how are we going to do that? How are we going to be? You just said that is instead of our natural instinct, in opposition to what comes natural, you want us to show kindness. How do we do that? Here's what he says. You cherish tender feelings for others. What's he really saying there? You make the choice to focus on compassion in those situations. You find the feeling of the emotion of compassion and you pursue it in opposition to, instead of what comes natural, being frustrated, being angry, being agitated. Instead, you choose the emotion that you're going to act on. And in both of these situations, the strong recommendation is that we choose the emotion of compassion. Jesus doesn't say ignore your feelings. Jesus doesn't say blindly follow your feelings. But Jesus would have us to know that we can choose the feelings that we focus on. And we can carry those to an eventual and logical and beneficial end with his help. So let's ask what that means. Summed up, here's what we have. In our normal natural state, our most common emotions are going to be those like anger, fear, and guilt. And you know what? There are reasons for these. Are there reasons in the world for anger? Are there reasons in the world for fear? Are there reasons in our lives for guilt? There absolutely are. But number 3, there are other emotions as well. Yes, there are. And we can choose to focus on those. And if we will prayerfully ask God to direct us, and if we will listen to the Holy Spirit within us that's transforming us and making us new, He'll enable us to choose the ones that we should focus on. Let me give you an example of this as we wrap up this lesson. In Hebrews chapter 12, listen to what we have here. This is a passage that I think really captures this idea of choosing the emotion to focus on. We can choose the emotion to focus on by watching what Jesus does and trying to follow his example. Listen to what it says. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and he is now seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. Notice a couple of things in here. He championed our faith. He is the one who won the victory over our sin and our death. He initiated our faith. He came after us. He pursued us while we were still yet sinners. Whilst we were rejecting him, he came for us. We didn't come for him. He came for us. And thirdly, he perfects our faith. We don't earn it. We don't arrive at it. But he lovingly, through his grace, continues to give and perfect the faith within us. And here's the part about emotions. Here's the part where he shows us how our choice of emotions matter, because his choice of emotion matter. Think of all the emotions that were to be experienced on that day that he went to his cross. Feelings of fear and dread and rejection and heartbreak and anger and frustration and loneliness and betrayal and all of those feelings. And yet, what was it that Jesus chose to focus on? What emotion did Jesus choose? Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured. He disregarded its shame, and now he is seated. Do you see the pattern there that he gave us? In this pinnacle moment of Jesus' earthly ministry, and the moment that has made the difference in the entire history of the universe, Jesus is demonstrating to us that a choice of emotion is important. There's reason for dread on the cross. There was reason for heartbreak, and there was reason for sadness, and there was reason for anger. But Jesus chose to focus with compassion on the joy awaiting him because of what he was providing for us. And this allowed him to endure. This allowed him to disregard shame. And this allowed him to be seated at a place of honor beside God's throne. And it is from that place of honor that he continues to work in our life. And he continues today to say to us, I can help you choose the emotion that you will act on. Jesus doesn't ask us to deny that there are many things in this world. He doesn't ask us to pretend that there aren't reasons for guilt or for fear or for anger. But he whispers to us, I chose joy. I chose compassion. And I can help you to do that as well. This morning, I hope that's a message that resonates with you and lays heavy on your heart. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and that you might have it to the fullest. And even though we work under a broken and twisted set of instincts, we are being transformed day by day, renewed by the power of the cross and the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives. This week, can I challenge you to talk to Jesus about helping you to choose the emotion that you will operate under?